We're back with the GCN Racing News Show. It's been another big week in the world of professional racing. The second of the season's 5 monuments took place yesterday in the form of the Tour of Flanders. We should be focusing mainly on that, but we shall also dip into the Grand Prix Miguel Indurain down in Spain, Dwars Door Vlaanderen, and also the Volta Limburg Classic. For me, it is the most exciting period of racing for the entire season. The Cobbled Classics week, which we are currently celebrating ourselves here on GCN with a whole host of related content, kicked off on Sunday with the Ronde van Vlaanderen. The Belgians go absolutely mad for it the whole week leading up to the race. It is all over the radio, all over the television, and all over the newspapers as well. This, in fact, was the newspaper I picked up the day before the race, having gone over there with my family to watch it. And if you haven't been already, I couldn't recommend going enough. It's a fantastic event to watch. Now, the 264 kilometres, which was described by debutant Vincenzo Nibali as 6 hours of stress and concentration, took the men's race from the start in Antwerp through to the finish in Oudenaarde over the famous Flemish bergs and kasseien. Now, it took a full 70 kilometres of pretty constant attacking for the early 11-rider breakaway to finally establish itself. They gained a maximum advantage, though, of only around 5 minutes, leaving them little hope of making it deep into the race. For many of the favourites, the biggest obstacle appeared to be trying to stay upright. Michael Valverde of Team Astana crashed hard, so too did Sepp van Mark and Oliver Naesen, twice each. The twitchiness of the peloton combined with the wet, slippery roads made for a particularly nervous race. The first really big move, though, came with about 50 kilometres still remaining. There was the Dutch duo of Dylan van Baarle of Team Sky and Sebastian Langeveld of EF Education First. They were joined with the Danish duo of Mads Pedersen and Magnus Cort Nielsen. Launching attack from what remained of the bunch, they soon caught what remained of the breakaway and soon built up a 40-second advantage. Now, with a distinct lack of domestiques left to work in the main group of favourites behind, it was quite a dangerous move. However, the crunch point of the race came just over the top of the Kruisbergen out of Ronde with 27 kilometres still to go. There was an initial acceleration by Zdeněk Stybar, which was countered by Milan-San Remo winner Vincenzo Nibali. And for a fleeting moment, you did just wonder whether the Shark would pull off the impossible for a second time in a couple of weeks. However, the dream was soon shattered as he was caught and then dropped by Team Quickstep's Nicky Terpstra. That momentary indecisiveness of the remaining favourites behind, coupled with the fact that the Quickstep teammates Gilbert and Stybar were constantly there to chase down attacks and dent morale, meant that Terpstra soon gained a very significant advantage. And with the form that he's currently on, that's not something that you can afford to give him. He caught and dropped Langeveld, Van Baarle and Pedersen on the steepest section of the Kwaremont, and with a 40-second advantage over the top of the final climb of the day, which was the Paterberg, the race was basically his to lose. And that is certainly not something that he was going to let happen. Despite Peter Sagan's best efforts, initially on his own over the Paterberg and then eventually with the rest of the favourites in the group behind, they weren't really able to make any dent at all into the advantage of the Dutchman up front, who took his maiden win at the race. That is to now add to the Paris-Roubaix title, which he took 4 years ago. Terpstra, incidentally, is the first Dutch winner since Adrie van der Poel, who's the father of Mathieu, some 32 years ago. And if you're wondering how Mathieu's arch-nemesis Wout van Aert got on, the answer is very well. In his first ever monument, he managed to come 9th and just looked pretty sublime throughout, particularly over the cobbled climbs. That said, he was beaten by an even younger rider, Mads Pedersen, who we shall be talking about a lot more a little bit later on. Right then, the women's event both started and finished in the town of Oudenaarde, and for them it was 153 kilometres on the cards. Not a whole lot happened for the first 50 k's or so, apart from a solo effort by Natalie van Gogh, and in fact the first big splits were caused by a huge pile-up which came on the run-in to the Muur van Gerardsbergen. Now, just like in the men's race though, the decisive action came on the ascent of the Kruisbergen, or at least just over the top of it, with 27 kilometres still remaining. Some strong riding on the front by Boels Doelman's Amy Peters had strung the group out, and Anna van der Breggen was there to take full advantage. Van der Breggen just looks like she's on another level this year, even by her own very high standards, and her advantage very quickly grew. In fact, already by the top of the Oude Quadrant, she had eked out a 1 minute lead, and at maximum advantage, she had 90 seconds. By that point, the race was really done and dusted. Behind, Kasseien was particularly aggressive over the final climbs, but two chasing groups merged inside the final K, and it was Amy Pieters who took the sprint ahead of Annemiek van Vleuten, making it a Dutch podium and a perfect weekend for the Dutch all round. The Women's World Tour will return in 2 weeks' time with the Amstel Gold Race, and it seems fitting now to give you an update on the World Tour rankings. Van der Breggen has propelled herself up to second now, just behind her Boels Dormans teammate Amy Pieters, whilst Peter Sagan's 6th position on the day was enough to give him the lead in the Men's World Tour rankings, just ahead of Alejandro Valverde with Tish Benoot in 3rd place. Now, in terms of our Rider of the Week, we have certainly got plenty of choice. Annemiek van Vleuten, for example, according to her Twitter feed, finished 3rd with a dislocated shoulder. Then there's Oliver Naesen, who finished 11th despite 2 bad crashes. Van Mark, who finished 13th after a similar amount of bad luck. Our 2 solo winners, or perhaps Michael Volgren for an impressive 4th place after another high-speed crash. However, our Rider of the Week has to be Mads the Beast Pedersen. After being away in that trio of riders for the last 50 k's of the race, then almost hanging on to Terpstra when he thundered past on the Oude Quadrant, and then holding a group of the strongest classics riders in the world at bay, he managed to take 2nd place. And that was his debut at the Tour of Flanders, no less. And on top of that, he's just 21 years old. Now, on Twitter, according to Café Roubaix, he's the youngest rider in the last 4 decades to finish on the podium of the Tour of Flanders. Whilst also on Twitter, Velaropa shows us how that performance compares to some previous greats, such as Freddie Martins, who also finished 2nd on his debut 45 years ago. And also Rick van Steenbergen, who won at his first try back in 1944. Now that is a mightily impressive ride and more than deserving in my book of our Rider of the Week award. Okay, moving on, or in some ways moving backwards, there was another semi-classic or warm-up race in the form of Dwars Door Vlaanderen last Wednesday. Some atrocious weather conditions greeted the riders that day. The action may have been hot, but the riders were anything but. There was an impressive show of strength and an impressive show of tactical riding by Yves Lampaert in the men's race. He outwitted a 5-man group in the closing kilometres to make it back-to-back wins for the Belgian at Dwars Door Vlaanderen. You do have to take your hat off though to Team Quickstep. This year at the big Belgian one-day races, they won all but one of them, and they came very close in the one that they missed out on, Ghent-Wevelgem, with Elia Viviani a very disappointed 2nd. Right, one of the big stories though from Dwars Door Vlaanderen was just how competent Alejandro Valverde was, making all of the major splits and at one point looking pretty good to try and go for the win. Both he and Movistar teammate Nairo Quintana had taken part in order to get experience on the cobbles prior to this year's Tour de France. Should a featherweight climber like Valverde be able to compete with the big guns over the cobbles? No, not really. Would we have been surprised if he'd won? Also no, not really. Right, we had an all-Dutch podium once again in the women's Dwars Door Vlaanderen. Ellen van Dijk was one of the few to be relishing the conditions, and when she attacked with 7 k's to go, she never looked back and nobody ever saw her again. The ever-consistent Amy Pieters finished 2nd on the day for Boels Dormans, with Floortje Mackay finishing 3rd. Meanwhile, down in Spain, Alejandro Valverde has been back to his usual tricks, i.e. winning. In some ways, it was a bit of a shame not to see him at the Tour of Flanders on Sunday because he had been contemplating doing that race, but nevertheless, he did race somewhere and took his 9th win of the year. The Spaniard made his move on the Alto de Muro, the final climb of the race. Carlos Verona was initially with him, riding for Mitchelton Scott, and although eventually dropped, he did hold on for 2nd place, albeit 20 seconds behind Valverde. And finally for this week, it's the Volta Limburg Classic up in the Netherlands, where, surprisingly, there wasn't actually a Dutch winner. There it was Jan Tratnik of the CCC squad, winner of the time trial in fact, at the Copper Bartley race just a week ago, who narrowly missed a fall whilst his breakaway companion Oscar Riesebeck wasn't quite so lucky. If you want to look at that photo, check out Team Roampot's Twitter account. Tratnik was able to go on and take his 2nd win in the space of just a week. Okay, that's all for this week's GCN Racing News Show. Next week, we shall be reporting on the Tour of the Basque Country, one of the hardest week-long races on the calendar, so spare a thought for the likes of Michał Kwiatkowski and Vincenzo Nibali, who will start that race the day after finishing the Tour of Flanders. That is hardcore. We will also, of course, be looking mainly at Paris-Roubaix, the Hell of the North, so make sure you join us this time next week for that. In the meantime, there will be loads more cobbled content coming up for you on GCN leading up to Paris-Roubaix, including a recon of the final 100 kilometres and a tyre pressure test over the Carrefour de l'Arc. I personally wouldn't recommend 100 psi. It's painful. Before all of that though, you can make sure you let us know if these down here are the hardest 5 climbs in the Tour of Flanders.